AI will certainly cost hundreds of millions of jobs. Here's how to save them.
The idea behind the human advantage is similar to the movement to get corporate America to take on the responsibility of mitigating climate change. I am proposing that we do that by changing the discussion on how these leaders make their decisions for where they invest their money and making it highly unpopular by not doing this.
Aloha and welcome to another episode of the Daily AI Show interview series. Today I'm joined by Stephencurtis. With nearly 20 years of experience as an enterprise-level developer, architect, and technical leader, he was a senior prototyping architect for spatial computing at AWS, and now is the principal software engineer for accelerated engineering at IQXR. Today, we're going to explore Stephen's insights on the impact of AI and XR technologies on the workforce. He highlights the urgent need for worker retraining and the hashtag #thehumanadvantage initiative to address job displacement while advocating for a balanced relationship between humans and machines. Stephen emphasizes how XR and AI can enhance human capabilities, driving future economic growth and innovation. Thank you for joining us today, Stephen. Now, what can you tell us about these articles and why you wrote them?
Well, thanks for having me. Really, the articles came so I I participated in Barbenheimer, which everybody else, did. And while I was sitting with my wife and watching, Oppenheimer, it struck me as how prescient the movie was because, the invention of the atomic bomb, it started off the atomic age. And, now we have this, this last 2 years has been sort of another critical inflection point with AI. And, Oppenheimer, a lot of scientists at the time were basically arguing like, hey, we can't be responsible for our creations and what they do. We're just scientists. And then when Oppenheimer put together a team of scientists, it's like, oh, well, we're doing this to help stop the war. But there were some among them, Oppenheimer chiefly, who was like, no, we need to do something to make sure that this thing that we've created is handled responsibly, and formed the Atomic Energy Commission, and actually took proactive steps to make sure that what he invented or what they created was going to be used responsibly. And I mean, to this day, there hasn't been another atomic weapon dropped in aggression, so it may have been successful. So I thought very much about that in the age of AI and the various efforts that folks in the tech industry are taking to make sure that it's used responsibly and its impact is mitigated, or its potential negative impacts are mitigated. And the one that is the most concerning to me, or the one that, from my point of view, it seems to be the most likely to occur and could have the most dramatic impact if it did, would be the impact on the labor, on the workforce, and how it might lead to massive unemployment. So the motivation, behind this article was to first restate that is a grave and urgent concern, to lay out some ideas on how that can be addressed. And then the associated white paper is basically, okay, now that I've made the pitch to other folks within the tech industry in this blog, like, hey, there's a problem. This is how I think we should go about solving it. The white paper was designed to be something that's business friendly, that they can email around, within the office and maybe iterate on. And then hopefully something potentially could grow from it, once it's had some time to be refined into something that's, I would say, more baked and has some insight from experts that, go beyond my area of expertise, which is largely on the technology side.
So I wanted to go over and identify these two articles that we're talking about today. The first one being, AI will certainly cost hundreds of millions of jobs. Here's how to save them. And the companion white paper, The Human Advantage, Leveraging XR and AI to Elevate Workforce Potential. So let's talk about the first article here. It discusses potential job displacement caused by AI. Do you have specific industries you believe that'll be most affected, and how long you think before we see those impacts?
So in the article, there's a few different bodies of research on the topic that go into detail of the certain industries that will most be impacted. But one thing that AI, the latest iteration of AI is allowing for is certain tasks that previously only humans could really do. And that centers around generative content and creativity. The article, I think the MIT research identifies about 23% of tasks, and these are sort of in the white collar area. Things like tasks that like writers do, something like a lawyer might hire somebody to do that's like a writing related task. Even some other creative tasks around not necessarily full generative artwork or audio, but the editing and modifying. So that 23% of tasks that are now automatable with this latest generation of AI, that looks like to be the next swing of jobs that could be lost. And we're already seeing that in some cases. I don't want to, provide inaccurate information, but I remember, I think it was BuzzFeed that had laid off a bunch of writers and announced that they were moving towards more generative writing content, as one example. So I think in the near term, that's probably what we're going to see the most of. And the counter argument to that obviously is, well, these are also tools that can be used to allow individuals to scale their efforts as well. But you're still looking at, whereas you were able to do the work of one person, now you can do 3 times the output. Like as a developer now, I think my output has been 4 to 5x by a combination of ChatGPT and Copilot, right? But that does mean that if I, for instance, right now I have a small team and we're building something, I can get away with less developers because I have those tools. So I think in the near term, in the longer term though, it honestly, almost every job is sort of at risk. And I can go into that in a little detail in a second, but that's where I think really the shift in the workforce and the retraining would be to identify, what it doesn't make economic sense to apply, apply the physical presence of a automated system or a robotic system that's powered by AI, and where it makes more sense to be cost effective to just make a human worker sort of more versatile and capable. And it'll be a long time before robots are cheaper than hiring a human. A robot that could do everything a human can do, than hiring a human. And in that intervening period, how can we make it always more cost effective to have a human generalist than a generalist like robot, as an example. So does that kind of answer your question? Or
Yeah. No, you went into some great details there. Now, you offer an initiative as to help this transition. Can you elaborate more on the hashtag, the Human Advantage initiative?
Certainly. So, the general perception right now is the best approach to deal with the job losses impacted by AI and AI's impact on automation is retraining and upskilling. So the labor force needs to retrain into areas where, AI and automation won't be able to go and help as much, like becoming an electrician and, anything that involves going on site or going into somebody's house or whatever, like that's probably not. So retraining, and then upskilling, meaning if you do something, make sure now you can do 10 things, and then you're harder to replace essentially. So historically, when there's a big shift, like let's say they are going to shut down all the coal mines in Virginia, that initiative goes through and there's some big economic package that's passed in Congress, And by the way, they're like, okay, we're going to put some money aside for some retraining to teach them how to like write software, right? So those people are like laid off and they're put into these retraining programs, and then they're entering back into the workforce, or they're trying to with a minimal amount of retraining. And they have been unemployed for a while. In the United States, we don't have a lot of safety nets. And some of them are doing this at like 50 or 55 when they're close to retirement. So the government and nonprofit approaches to retraining and upskilling, they're not bad. They can be very effective, but they're quite often too little too late. And a lot of people end up falling through the cracks, and you end up with people, especially close to retirement, that really can't make the transition. The idea behind the human advantage is similar to, the movement to get corporate America to take on the responsibility of mitigating climate change. It's to get corporate America, and specifically the tech companies that are creating the technology that will displace jobs, to take responsibility for making sure that the human workforce has enough humans to have an advantage over AI based on their skills, their role, or the tools that they can use, which is where XR comes in, to make sure to mitigate the impact of the very job losses that they're creating. So it's it's like a social movement. Companies want to demonstrate that they are investing in the human advantage while they're offsetting the jobs. But it also proposes a number of approaches that you can take where companies can invest make investments, and also how companies can look at a calculation for how they can calculate where it makes the most sense to invest in humans, as opposed to investing in AI and automation, and sort of identifying that in advance so they can start planning now. So we don't have to do all this like on the backside, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Could you go into a little more and explain this economic model that you talk about in the article?
Sure. So I think that when you look at things like automation, ask like, when would you automate and replace a human worker? Generally, it's pretty well understood that you're talking about economies of scale, right? If you're creating, 10,000 of a thing, or 100,000 of a thing, or 1 million of a thing, the investment into equipment to automate that process makes more sense. And that's sort of the automation that's largely already happened, right? Where you look at tasks that humans still do today, and they don't generally automate, up until today, it's included things that require a lot of versatility, physical, that included things that requires creativity, but also includes things that it doesn't make sense to invest in a piece of equipment to do, right? Because the individual, financial benefit of that is too low, right? With these advances in AI and robotics recently, that physical, the things physically that humans can only do, that's getting smaller. Creatively, the things that humans can only do, that's getting smaller. So the economic model wants to introduce other variables to consider when trying to look at where humans have an advantage. One of them is a human. We have a supply chain that creates humans, which is, we raise them and we teach them the basics. We put them out in the wild when they're an adult, right? It's not a very brittle supply chain. And a human starts at age 18 with capabilities equal to an advanced AI already, right? Equal to a very advanced, expensive robot already. There's not a supply chain of rare earth, minerals and, semiconductors and all the things that go into producing that, right? So that means a human worker is has a less brittle supply chain, and is more likely to be available and less subject to supply chain related issues. So that's one thing that I don't see talked about a lot. The other thing is harkening back to Fordism, the idea that human workers are also your customers. So actually factoring in the impact of displacing your own workers out of your customer base, I think that boardrooms need to factor that in as well. Amazon as a company, they're like the second largest employer in the world. They're doing great. They could automate a large number of their stuff, and they're still creating probably just as many workers, just as many customers as they are, as they have workers. All their workers are the customers, right? a company like OpenAI, for example, they're not really creating more customers, right? I think that if you looked at the impact that they're making, they're probably offsetting way more jobs than they are empowering. So that's the idea behind the human advantage.
Now, would you be able to provide a few examples of how XR and AI technologies have successfully or potentially amplified human qualities in like some real world applications?
Yeah. So when we talk about XR, let me just frame what I mean by XR. XR is the general term for extended reality. When you look at applying that to a training or a workplace assistive technology, it generally goes into two camps. One camp is virtual reality. That's where you put the goggles on and you're in a virtual world. And that's largely used for training, right? The advantage of virtual reality training is you don't need the physical location or equipment. You don't need the trainer to physically be there. And the place and the training system can run independent of an actual trainer being present or the location, right? So for VR training, it allows you to scale training programs like beyond the current limitations. And the other aspect of VR training is there's been a lot of examples where there are companies that implemented it and found that it actually increases things like retention, reduces error rates and stuff like that as compared to other training. The article that I shared or the white paper cites a lot of specific examples, but the companies that have run these test pilot programs for VR training include UPS, Walmart, Boeing, Accenture. So that's already an established thing. On the flip side, you have augmented reality, and that's the idea of you put on the headset and you see the world, but then it's augmented by a user interface with information. And in that case, that can empower you to do more than you could do without the training before, right? I go through training to learn how to do something. I put on AR goggles to get information, but also to do something real time that I might not have already known how to do, right? So your Maytag repairman or woman, they're pulling up a bunch of PDF manuals on their iPad, right? Or a video. They're looking up how to mitigate the problem, what the different steps are and whatnot, because they don't have in their head the knowledge of all of the 500 or 600 different models, right? And then they go and they conduct the repair, and then they're looking back at the manual. They're looking at another video. The advantage of AR goggles, and this has been confirmed with the different wide-scale implementations of these, is if you can build an AR experience where all the knowledge of that manual or those videos is built into it, but also those goggles can get data, telemetry from the system it's working on, suddenly it's no longer, I have to look at the error code, look it up in the manual, follow the right steps. It's I'm seeing telemetry from the system. I know the state the system is in. Oh, and by the way, I can now get contextual directions on how to do that, right? So the implication of AR when it comes to upskilling is that a single, let's say, maintenance worker is now not just a master of one or two or three subsets of a type of equipment. They're now a master of all of the equipment at once, right? The training and task guidance together, it can, be really powerful in turning an individual worker for a lot less money into a highly valuable, highly skilled worker that will always keep their skills fresh.
All right, that is very interesting. I can see how providing that training and learning environment and beyond that in the real world application of being on site has a great potential there. Now, I'd love it if you could go into more of how you foresee AI applying or as a companion to the XR field.
So currently, there's a couple of different ways. Currently, the biggest barrier to entry, or one of the largest barriers to entry for VR and augmented reality moving in scale into the industrial and enterprise workforce is the cost of content creation. There just aren't enough. There aren't enough developers and designers out there with the skills, because they largely come from the video game industry, right? With the skills out there to create enough of these different scenarios to get it out in mass. There's a lot of problems with it. The cost of content creation is very high. So that's one problem. Number two, another problem is keeping the training up to date, because a lot of this stuff changes dramatically, right? And that is number three. Coming up with a training scenario that's as complex as working on a complicated real world problem, it's very nonlinear, right? And also responding to a situation, understanding that a red light here and a yellow light here, in your manual, those are two different codes. But really, that's an indication of a fuel leak over here. Like this, you can do that with some root cause analysis. That's also very complex, right? So right now, when we're creating these VR training scenarios and augmented reality sort of task guidance programs, even if they're very complex, they're very linear. And if they're not, they took a lot of time to build. It's expensive to change. AI can help on all three fronts. AI can help make the content generation of the initial training scenarios much more affordable. AI can help make sure that the data is kept fresh and it's adaptive. It was one of the things that AI could do relatively well in very narrow contexts, is allow for a little bit of, adaptation. The number three, especially with like the large language models like GPT-4 and beyond, some of the other techniques that are developing with like QStar and the idea of bringing reasoning into AI models, is AIs might be able to help us provide contextual analysis, real-time analysis of contextually specific situations, whereas before an AR task guidance system could really just tell you, hey, this red light means this error code, right? So in all three of those ways, AI can really help enhance XR to achieve these goals. And separate from that, since we already have large language models and the human communication, voice communication is a very effective technique. You can't eliminate XR entirely, have a completely voice interface, and still give workers the same kinds of advantages that I just described with XR. All the things I described with XR, if they don't have a strong spatial component to them, you can translate that same experience to purely voice, and then it's your operational manual in your ear. So even without XR, AI can be helpful in making workers more skilled and competent.
Interesting. Yeah, I think what we've seen a lot of recently in the AI sphere is how we can apply or use AI in our day-to-day businesses. And we've identified through the various studies that you pointed out and other things that we've seen in the space, that training and upskilling are going to be more and more important to advance the human workforce, right? And not just be replaced. So I think you have a very interesting angle here. Now, for those of us who are reading these articles, what do you want people to learn or take away as the main idea or the purpose behind them?
So I think the main idea is that we, as the tech industry, I'm not talking to the executives, I'm not talking to the key investors, those of us that are actually building these systems, right? We need to be proactive in solving this problem, right? We can't trust our leadership to do it. Their legal responsibility is profit. That's not good or bad. That's how the roles work, right? They have a fiscal response. They have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize profit. Okay, it's going to be a middle up movement if it's anything, right? So we need to take on the responsibility of making sure to mitigate these job losses. I am proposing that we do that by changing the discussion on how these leaders make their decisions for where they invest their money and making it highly unpopular by not doing this. I propose a number of different ways that we can, actually shift this technology in a very deliberate way to, improving workers, capabilities. But I don't know if that's the actual answer. I just want something to catch fire, right? So if somebody has a better narrative, right? If you read the article, read the white paper, agree that you want to solve the problem, and then help me adjust the narrative so we can get something to catch fire. So that's really what it is, right? Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Again, Stephen, thank you for joining us today and talking about these topics that are going to be more and more prevalent actually as each day goes on. And with the speed in which technologies advance, especially in the AI space, the questions and answers need to be developed quicker rather than later. So if people want to follow up and read the article, you can check out the Medium article and follow up there. But Stephen, where else can they contact you or follow up with you?
So the best way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. Stephen with a PH Curtis, Stephen Curtis. I work at IQXR. I will accept any friend requests. That's where I would share most updates. You can follow my company, IQXR, as well. We have a number of different, very mission-driven and open source first initiatives in the XR space that we're going to be trying to put out there. The project I'm working on very specifically, I think, should help with some of the problems I laid out in this discussion. Next week, I will be sharing the enterprise track the first day, the 18th. At the AWE Augmented World Expo. So if you're attending, if you're in the XR community, I'll be there chairing that track all day. I'll be there all week. You can probably find me there. If not, I encourage you, if you're interested in the enterprise side of XR, to check out AWE's. We put all of the different presenters online on video. So that's a great way as well. And then hopefully just watch the Daily AI show, and I might come on again in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. And everybody else, till next time, aloha.